It's a good beginning. Looks important. A man with papers. For a second, continuing the last thing we were talking about, last time we were taping, if you recall, of how in the secondary world, that facts can sound more interesting than they are. And the expansion on that facts can sound better than they are, more useful than they are, more intriguing than they are. But to wrap it up, they can sound better than they are, such as some of the ones we mentioned as ideas, facts, such as doing operas in English, holistic preventive health maintenance, George Jones plays surf music, or one we didn't mention, how about socialism and communism? Well, hell, how about all government? I mean, as soon as you hear, I picked out religion as the epitome last time. It'd still run you a good, hard race, but either that or government. You first hear about it and you think, heaven. Utopia is here, hopefully without Mr. Moore here to talk about it, but at least utopia is upon us. Until you have to deal with its actualities. All right, in line with that, I was going to mention that you could take off a small excursion I didn't get around to mentioning on your own that you might find interesting. If you can do it, of course, impartially, objectively, you start compiling your own running list out in the everyday world of facts. You got to do it objectively now. This is not criticism. It's just an unnatural notation of facts that sound a lot better than they turn out to be. Somewhat related, if you'll also recall, along those same lines we were mentioning that how it is a part of facts' responsibility to sound better than they are. And in a way, this helps compensate for the dullness, for the placidity of acts, which, in one person's lifetime, acts can only be what they are. You just got to face up to that. And if you can tie that in line with the fact that all facts finally fail, that is, they turn out not to be as good as they sounded. One more time for you in TV and radio and picking up sounds on the steel plates in your headland. It's not a criticism of ideas. See, I just pointed out, I reminded you that that is part of the responsibility of ideas, of facts, is to sound better than they are, which, of course, leads up to the continuing activities, the constant job, the occupation that never seems to end for our hero, Captain Irony. There's nothing amiss. All facts are going to turn out to be ironic, unless they die such a whimpering death that you think, well, T.S. Eliot died in my closet or something. If it's going to have any impact, if the death is going to be public at all of any fact, that is, any idea, it's going to be buried not with honors. It's going to be buried probably with Captain Irony standing there, because the end of the fact is going to be that it turned out to be, oh my God, apparently just the opposite of the original intention. And the mourners go, oh, when will life ever straighten out? If they want to see somebody straightened out, all they got to do is look down there in the hole. There's somebody straightened out. So those of you out there picking up this on your car battery, maybe accidentally, don't get involved with, hey, you're right. Boy, yeah, I like this. This sounds like some satirical, smart-ass show that, hey, you're saying that all these great ideas people have turn out to be nothing. Wrong. Well, El Wrong-o. It is part of the job of facts. Part of their responsibility is to ultimately fail so that they can be replaced by new facts. Because what you're dealing with in the actual world, such things as sex and eating, they do not fail. The basic primary acts, they just, as the Mississippi River used to, sex and eating and sleeping just keep rolling along. They do not need to be worked on. They do not need to be repaired. If you have trouble with sex, you need to be repaired. If you have trouble with eating, you need to be repaired. Not hunger, not eating. The primary actual world of man in anybody's lifetime, I just remind you, but surely everybody sees that, it is not a matter of being changed. If there is any change going on from any view, even any teensy-weensy change going on in the actual world, it is of no consequence within a lifetime other than if lava begins to crawl up your leg. Or if a tornado suddenly rips up your knickers and just comes right up, you're in trouble. Then you can say, well, in my case, the actual world, whatever it was you were going to say before you went away to meet Judy Garland and Elvis. But the point is, in the lifetime, the primary acts, the actual world, other than catastrophes, other than you discovering a mirror or something, but other than natural catastrophes, there is nothing, there is no change that is going to take place in one person's lifetime. If there is change going on, which this is no consequence, but there is some genetic shifts that go on in life. Life has its own correcting, improving mechanisms. But in one lifetime, it is of no consequence. Everyone should know that. There's nothing to argue about. Only dreamers believe that in some lifetime that you're going to sit around and engage in rituals or give offerings to gods, and that some genetic, that is some primary change, will take place in your life. Unless you can dream it, which is all right, but unless you can dream it, it ain't going to happen. It does not happen in anyone's lifetime. That is not the way life works. In one lifetime, it is like the conscious span. That is, it is the life and death of an intellectual human. That is, it is the life and death of the factual world in your case, which is the only case. There is no such thing as actual change of any personal consequence. So what you're dealing with is the possibility, if any, of factual change. And in a sense, facts ultimately, finally always failing, is the fact that they do change, and they can change, and it gives the illusion, the real illusion. It gives the appearance, it gives the impression of change. You might note that very specifically, the intellect at all ordinary levels is always, at all ordinary levels, all the way from the least educated and sophisticated out there in the city, out at street level, to the most suave and debonair. That the intellect is continually on guard in search of good new facts. All the way from people with 5th grade education, just semi-literate, to those in the towers of Babel, ivory Bible towers. This manifests itself very specifically in the form of new words and phrases. Routine critics operating at life's behest, as if they could work for anyone else. The routine critics over in that part of life's body are driven to continually attack what is in our day and time referred to as like faddish drivel, double speak, psychobabble, California speak, all those attacks. But as they stand out there, as they're supposed to, we're not here to deal with critics, but there they are standing out in the parking lot, sticking out their tongues at all the fans going in the stadium, and they're missing the whole point. unless they become the majority, and then they are in the stadium and somebody else will be sticking their tongue out at them. But the point is, this sort of thing, you don't have to worry about critics out there. As you know, you've got it somewhere inside of your own nervous system, and that all of you will assume have been in past times, before you saw the light, that at past times you had certain aspects of your own nervous system that was, shall we say, fairly sane, routine and everyday. And so that you could hear this brand new terms, the latest term going all around you, hear it one time, and if the first time you hear it, it might strike your fancy a little bit. That's kind of intriguing. Somebody sort of wrapped this up, this whole complex area, and they kind of wrapped it up in a cute little phrase. How interesting. And then suddenly, you turn on your radio, you turn on your TV, you crank up your car and pick up those sounds from the... It's like everybody and his brother, the mayor of Dumas, Texas even, is now saying this term. And we'll assume somewhere in your nervous system is that kind of criticism about Jesus Christ. People think that they're now intelligent and all they're doing is repeating that phrase. It's that kind of attack which is natural. It has always gone on. I just used all the way from Orwell up until right today of all this doublespeak and bureaucratic mumbo-jumbo, just a dribble of people just mechanically repeating whatever the latest phrase is. It's a sign of health. It's a sign of good times in the city. It is a living example of the intellect seeking, as it should, at the primary level, the same way that you as an organism, as humanity as a whole organism, seeking good, wholesome food is the intellect. The factual world seeking out good new food in the form of good new facts, in the form specifically of good new words and phrases. The intellect, when it be with it, when the intellect is up on the latest in phrases, it gives again very distinctly. And quit right quick if you've got an inclination of sticking out your tongue at this. But think about it. It gives at the ordinary level, it gives quite distinctly an impression of change. Just the terms that just now that someone can use a term. Well, here we are, the early middle part of 1991. New World Order, which Bush didn't invent that phrase, I don't think. But at any rate, now everybody's using New World Order. And you can stand around a cocktail party with ordinary people nowadays, all the way from bricklayers to atomic bricklayers, physicists. And you can say, people can be discussing the ins and outs, perhaps people in more arcane professions over here, and they're discussing certain of the economic rococos of what's going on in Eastern Europe now. And you can nod along and sit up and at some opportune moment say, well, I guess that's going to be part and parcel of the New World Order. And people go, huh? Now you could suddenly, if you were this good at yourself, to be able to have your own kind of thought analyze its own stuff, you could think, boy, now I'm falling into that same kind of psycho-babble. And what the hell does that mean? I'm just tut-tut. Having nothing to do with deceased potentates of that great country of Egypt. But you miss the whole point. It is a sign of health. What is the factual world going to do? Once you begin to get a grasp of what this arbitrary but although useful division into the world of acts and the world of facts, what is the factual world going to do? Now, we've already covered the actual world. What are you going to do about sex? Now, you can factually throw in stuff and say, well, I'm going to jazz up my sex life and I'm going back to dressing up like Clarabelle the Clown and make my girlfriend dress up like Howdy Doody, or I don't know what. But the point is, once it gets down to the act of doing it, you're just kind of limited. Or you can say, well, I'm tired of eating, cold egg sandwiches. I'm going to expand the repertoire of my culinary endeavor. But still you get down to it, and you're going to have to eat something that has the right kind of star material, the right kind of cosmic dust, nutrients, and etc. to keep you alive. The point being, at the actual level, there's very little you can do. In your lifetime, it's just of no consequence. If you're going to do anything to affect the primary level, all it can do is be a certain kind of factual spin to put on it, but not enough to actually hurt it. You can't, you're not hurting anybody, for those of you, there are no Baptists here, are there? You know, if you're going to do something weird sexually, it's not going to hurt you, but notice, it's not going to change sex. And you may say, well, I'm going to eat the brand new, do something weird eating. I'm going to eat what they eat in Oregon, or, you know, somewhere. But assuming you don't overdo it, when it actually gets down to eating, you can't really change that. The actual world is simply what it is. But it's part of the factual world with humans, nobody else. Not in these 3 dimensions and around these parts. It's part of the factual world's job, in a sense, to give a new kind of spin, to give certain variations, but not conclusive alterations. Because if they were conclusive, then the factual world would be at the same level as the actual world. If man could come to factual conclusions, well, we've wrapped this one up, Tonto. If they wrapped it up, they buried it. But if they had actually wrapped up a fact to such a point that it became, that it could transcend the world of facts and become acts, then it would be inalterable. It would be, it doesn't happen, but you see the point. The very kinds of things of fetish, thought, behavior, well, now some of you won't get distracted me saying behavior because we're still talking about factual behavior. I'm not talking about actual behavior. That is, of in some way trying to actually change the act of eating or of sex or of sleeping. If you actually tried to change it at the primary level, you're suicidal. You need to be put away, or at least kept away from us. But it is the factual world wherein simultaneously, as always, due to the nature of, let's all repeat it, a 3-dimensional world operated by polarized energy, right? It's on that basis that simultaneously with anything that can be noted, there is simultaneously, coevally, in the next room, is what appears to be the opposite going on. So while the factual world's responsibility is in large part to change, to make the factual world, the actual world, apparently more interesting. Well, it's its job. It is also a part, not just of critics, but notice, it is a part of the process of the walking of a good section. It may vary in intensity and size, but some segment of life's body to be criticizing. I just picked out these examples of people, linguists, philosophers, social critics, observers of the English language, all sorts of people continually take shots, oftentimes published in best-selling books. Many of these people are considered to be the intellectuals of our time, poking great fun at people. I started to say in Southern California. They're ever getting people in Southern California? Don't write me. Of people coming up with these phrases and them suddenly sweeping the country. And no longer is it somebody at a high-class cocktail party saying New World Order. One of these writers for the New York Times Sunday Book Review section says, I was in a working-class bar and saw some guy with a hard hat drinking a cheap beer, a Boilermaker as a matter of fact. And I heard him turn around to somebody, and suddenly I heard the terms. Believe it or not, I was aghast. It's the only people who write for the New York Times I think can become aghast anymore. But he says, from this man, God bless him, from the lips of this crude working sort came the term, and I quote, New World Order. Now this is exactly, and he goes on, you've all surely read stuff like that, or else wrote it inside of your own nervous system up here, of saying, what are we doing to the way we handle the language? which is a short step for even ordinary critics to point out not only the language, look now how we are mangling our thought processes, wherein an ordinary person or even those passing for true thinkers will take some newly coined phrase, New World Order, and they just repeat it like blind, half-drunk parrots. And nobody knows what they're talking about. They don't stop and analyze what they're saying, and it's leading us off into blah, 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 blah. You're missing the point. They're missing the point. It is a sign of health. It is a sign that the factual world is alive and functioning. Because part of the responsibility, part of the proper function of facts, is for all facts to finally fail. They have got to come apart. They have got to be replaced by new facts. Sex does not get replaced. Eating does not get replaced. The actual world, at that kind of primary level, for all intents and purposes of your lifetime, and for all intents and purposes for the history as far as you know it of this planet, the human history, just moves right along. But here, the great world of man, the secondary world, the intellectual world, the facts, the things that are held holy, oftentimes even referred to as spiritual, emotional, and social, that's all the secondary world, no matter how they try to split it up. This, whatever the facts are, that, well, God lives up on that mountain there. All the way from that to the world is flat. All facts, those are even held inviolate. They're considered to be irrefutable cosmic facts. They're going to finally fail. But that's not because something's wrong, unless you're in a theology school. And then you should take a break, maybe duck and hide over in the corner. But there is nothing wrong. It is part of facts' proper function to finally fail so that they may be replaced. Would you like to also note, if you want to get really tricky, why not, that the intellect does another little something in the same regard, having to do with the sense of time, which is there is an actual basis to it, to time, but there is also the factual basis, which is the only thing that really interests men. Because once you made up the term time, then you're talking about a kind of secondary time. At any rate, you'll see what I mean. I was not trying to enrage a mob into some deep philosophical discussion. But the intellect ties time into what I'm talking about, into the factual world and its purpose. And it does it in a specific way. And one of them is in your lifetime, a good example. But the intellect continually divides up time frames. In the past it did it, if you look historically, as always, since things appear to speed up, the Middle Ages, the late Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the Venetian Renaissance, the late Renaissance, the anti-Renaissance. But in your lifetime, how about this? At least you think that is old and hoary. Spelled with an H. So that you Baptists don't write me thinking I am prostituting history. It divides up the factual world into time frames with a very specific purpose in mind, without them knowing it. I'll show you what the purpose is served, hopefully in a second. In your lifetime, you've heard such phrases. Even if you didn't catch them all, but you've heard phrases, and all these you can put them in quotes. The bland or the naive, the simple 50s, the Eisenhower years, the more up to date probably for you guys, the ideological 60s. And many people kind of shudder and imagine themselves in bell bottoms and long hair and remember them out on the street marching, hollering, "Which way's Berkeley?" That kind of. Or the me 70s, or the greedy 80s. You've heard all those terms, and there are the variations, but they are said, and forgetting kind of attack now, we're past that. Leave that to somebody else. Do note, those are not any longer, or they never were, but they are not by any means some sort of just throwaway, disposable terms. These ideas now, these segments of somebody saying, well, things have certainly taken a drastic turn. Not that I didn't expect it, but a drastic turn since the greed, in fact, I'll just go ahead, the greedy 80s. This is taken quite seriously. Don't laugh at it, because parts of you would listen to it and you no longer notice it, but it is divided up into a time frame when, if you stop for a second, if we're going to do this again, if you stop, whoever was saying this, let's assume it's somebody with credentials. May I see your credentials? Oh, we've done that one. A sociologist, a man with a famous book. And if you say, wait a minute, let's get off camera here. Come here a minute. You notice you keep saying things you refer to. Let's say his book was called The Dream of the 60s Denied. Something like, well, let's just say something like that. And so the guy grew up. He was out there at the barricades and throwing the cocktails and sitting in. And so he's written this historic book. It's having a critical and somewhat popular success. And if you take him aside and you say, I've listened to you talk, I've read the book, and you treat the 60s almost as though it was a living entity. You go, yeah. You say, all right, this kind of thing of saying, all right, the 60s, you call them the ideological 60s. And you keep using a term and you have wrapped up. I found the book interesting, parts of it. But as far as it actually being that a decade forms some kind of cohesive, almost separate living unit, are you serious? Would you follow an ordinary intellectual, if you pushed it that far, like a whole bunch of this stuff, that if I got somebody and they would listen long enough and I was foolish enough to do it, and I could push them far enough, you'll make people go, which is doing what they're not supposed to be doing, that is thinking more than they have to, having to consider just one more step, which you're not supposed to do. If I could get an ordinary person, the guy that wrote the book, say, well, sure, if that's what you're saying, I don't mean that, January the 1st, 1960, or if you want to be correct, I guess 1961. But anyway, I don't believe, and then suddenly, at the last day of 1969, on December the 32nd, I'm just saying if anybody was listening, if you were still sane. The guy says, I'm not saying, certainly not that 10 years just started and stopped. Oh, no, I'm not saying that. Well, look, I got to get back here and finish the interview. And then he would treat it that way. Not that he's incorrect, not that he's stupid. But notice it is, again, a part of the function of the intellect in the factual world to come up with such notions. And it's not just time. I use time. It's all these other catchphrases that you can attack. And you could get people to get defensive, except they are used profitably. Used properly by people just saying things that you no longer even question, or at least those involved in the area of interest. Is some political commentator will just make a blanket statement around those who are interested. Something about, well, obviously the Protestants here in Northern Ireland are never going to do so-and-so. And everybody goes, yes. When you know damn well, just with a little thought, it's not that he's wrong. Of course, this gives rise to those more childish reflections, as always, of somebody saying, well, this is a kind of intellectual, mechanical talk prejudice that we've got to watch. You can't lump everybody together. People's always been saying that, little critics here and there, but notice it has no effect. It does not stop it because of the nature of the factual world. So back to what I was saying, this guy says, perhaps he's a famous political observer, writer, perhaps with a famous book. And he says, well, there's no doubt we cannot expect any different attitude from the Protestants here in Northern Ireland. And people go, yeah. It's the same kind of thing. It's taking the factual world and dividing it in such a way that there is no real defensible meaning to it other than this. There's not supposed to be. That if you push this fact far enough, you say, wait a minute, I'm tired of this, wait a minute. And he could have said the Catholics, you understand. He could say, well, the Catholics, it doesn't matter. And you say, wait a minute, how can you say, and you're supposed to be famous, you're supposed to be an expert in this, how can you just suddenly just blithely say, well, we cannot expect any more from the Protestants or the Catholics here in Northern. How can you say that when you know it's not true? You cannot do that. And you could get the guy, maybe, to go, well, I don't mean that literally, not down to the final, last little Protestant here, but that doesn't matter. The intellect does it, It's not untoward. It is not ill-founded. But it's meaningless, except in the factual world. But it will eventually fail. That you can make it fail even with a person. That's why I was saying at the individual level, it means nothing and you'd be a fool to do it. But you could take someone making those kind of statements, that is, dealing with a factual world that is a total invention, a proper invention, and you can make the facts, according to this expert, you can make it fail by just pushing him. If he'd play along and say, well, no, wait a minute. You say that the 60s did not live up to their promise period. Yes, I said that. Or you're saying that we cannot expect any change in attitude from the Catholics in Northern Ireland in the foreseeable future. Yes, I said that. And to play the little game I've already done, if you start pushing it just a little bit, you could get one guy, just for a second, if he would just play along and be sane at all in the ordinary sense, you could make his facts fail him, which is what thinking more than you have to is. That's why, of course, nobody should do it. Okay. Do you understand? His own facts would fail, and he'd have to go, well, no, I didn't mean that literally. I didn't mean all-inclusive. I just didn't mean that literally. Well, I know what you meant. Or, if you'd like it better, I know what life meant. It is part of the factual world's responsibility is to continually present facts that are going to eventually fail. But for the time being, they give a new glamour. They give a new excitement. They give a new interest. They give a new spin. They give a new variation. They give a new view of the otherwise intractable, unchangeable acts that are the primary world and that are our collective mother's milk. Well, all in all, all of the above that we've noted, you could say, serves up the purpose or serves up a sense of possible, continually possible factual change amidst what is literally and otherwise unchangeable, primary, actual world. And for any of you who would still like to call upon the fine, excellent services of Captain Irony, just notice. Oh, wait a minute, before I say notice, let me put it to you another way. You got a few minutes? Sure. All right. Don't lose your place. Little theatrics. That's for those of you still picking it up on your car battery. Well, I know several people have written about how hard it is to get a clear video. And those steel plates they were doing back during the Korean and Vietnam War, that many of you I know still you have trouble with the video portion. Our program? Let me ask you this, so don't lose your place. Query. What might be the stronger, acts or facts? All right. Let's make a hand gesture and look off like we're going to. All right. How about this? First, we'll consider the two different worlds. If you were starving, the act of you being unrepaid for a $100 loan you put out would be the strongest. I mean, there's no doubt, I'm not being funny. If you were in a position, which probably some of you have been sometime, but to where you were actually to the point that you were really hungry, whether you were going to die or not, but you were seriously hungry, and somebody that nearby, somebody within still alive that you had lent $100 to didn't pay you back, the act of them not repaying you, comma, don't stop there, that's not the point yet. But then consider this. What if you were in such a position that this amount of money was meaningless? That the $100 meant nothing to you? It would then be the fact, the principle of not being repaid the $100 would be the strongest, would it not? Would you also care to note the most civilized, the most normal human inclination to just as quickly, if not more so, murder over the principle of not being repaid that $100 that was meaningless to you than actual hunger. I am not saying that it's not possible that it occurs that somebody nowadays within the civilized context of most parts of this planet still do not in some way rob and maybe even commit murder when they're actually starving. But I got to suggest to you, whether you ever thought about it, that the balance is more likely even today that people kill one another over the principle rather than the actual starvation for several reasons. One is it's hard to starve in today's world, at least in the civilized portion of this planet. But people are just as likely, nay, may I suggest more so, to kill over the second possibility. Not that you're starving and so borrowed $100 from you, licked your feet, promised to pay you back, never has, never even mentioned it after that, and you're starving. You are seriously hungry. You need the rent. You're going to be thrown out. It is more likely, rather than you get involved down to an actual level of such things as mayhem, or on the distaff side, mayher. It is much more likely, the more civilized. Again, we have the interesting part of Captain Irony. The more civilized, think about it, the more civilized you are, the more likely it is that you would kill the person once you got over being hungry and you got your rent paid. And now you have time, you've got a good job, you hit the number, something. Now $100 to you is nothing. But suddenly somebody brings up his name or he moves down the street from you, you see him on the street. The more civilized you are, the more likely it is that you would now engage in physical abuse of this person over the principle than it was previously when you were actually hungry and you actually, I'm using the word specifically, actually as opposed to fact, when you actually needed the money. And the strength was in the act of him failing to repay you as promised, as is just. If you put all this together, even though it's not St. Patty's Day, again, you put it all together and it does not spell mother. It spells civilization. Well, how about let's conclude and just say, ah. The sweet aroma of the factual world being alive, aroused, and healthy. The sweet aroma, while simultaneously a large portion of the energy operating at your old neural level would not agree. It thinks, boy, does life stink. Ah, the sweet aroma, where they smell scum and garbage, decay, fear, stink. I was going to end with our certain little dramatics. We can all join in and go, ah, the sweet aroma of life, being alert, alive, aroused, and healthy, by being factually unstable and presenting to the ordinary intellect facts of greater and lesser magnitude, facts of scientific, spiritual, social, psychological importance, facts which will finally fail. As one of the Kyroots said a while back, didn't get much of a reaction, but there was a God somewhere in a reality that after a particularly good day would give a good, long, luxurious stretch and go, ah, it's good for someone else to be alive.